came on, he wasn't feeling Mississippi, so.
All right, we alive. So I'm gonna listen on my other phone to see what it sounds like.
Got the flags flying.
Well, no, they actually dug some here.
We need to be collecting signatures.
Well, I see you flying flags.
He's coming.
Surprised because I knew,
He's gonna join. It's been announced.
Yeah, I seen it a few hours ago in the Star Tribune.
Yeah, it didn't take but a minute before we saw it. It said gold crab, there it was.
I can move.
Talking Trump.
all right, did you do it today?
Doing great now.
Thanks for coming. Be sure and sign in.
I did.
Yeah. It's on now, man. But I didn't find out an hour ago, you don't plan on finding out. But it is good.
Madison, can I get your signature there, Phil? Next person.
As soon as everybody gets situated
You come to the right place.
Thought I did.
You just need to fill out this form and give me $10.
I'll give this back to you.
I just sent you Angela's cell phone number.
She's already on.
I know, but in case you need to call her, I know.
That's what we got.
Oh, great. Hot stuff.
Let's see.
ready to go, everybody? If I had a gavel, I would bang it, but I don't.
Listen, it's a slight delay. Listen to this.
We had a gavel,
Yeah,
we did.
probably in a box somewhere.
Was that when you was chairman?
When I was chairman,
Yeah.
we had a gavel.
And she used it.
I think I got a meat tenderizer or something I could bring in. Work just as well. All right, we got our board operator here is gonna mute the people on, people who've just called in, so. All right, welcome to the February meeting of the Danville Republican Committee. I want to thank everybody who covered for me last month. The cruise was great, it was a good time. Got sick when I got back, but was perfectly healthy the whole 2 weeks we were on the water. Fred,
Yes.
can you lead us in prayer?
Oh, yes, I can do so. Let us pray. Father Almighty, Lord God, we gather this evening to contemplate the direction of our community, our commonwealth, our nation, and our world. We humbly ask that you spread your wisdom among the members of this gathering and guide us with your everlasting love and wisdom. We ask that you spread your blessing, protection for our family members and loved ones. We ask that you protect and guide the protectors and the peacekeepers and the peacemakers as they stay busy around the world. We pray as a body for all those who are hurting today, especially for those who have lost loved ones. We pray for those who are infirm. We pray for peace for those that are suffering from illness and for their friends and families and loved ones. We ask that you enlighten our minds in your goodness. We pray for your wisdom, that our actions are just and serve righteousness and goodness. We pray for your peace in our world, peace in our country, and peace in our community. Amen.
All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and the Republican Creed will be read by our speaker.
Send you a link that you can send to people if you got anybody.
We believe that free enterprise system is the most productive supplier of human beings
They
and
click on the
economic
link, then they
justice,
can watch if you got
that all
somebody.
I don't know of anybody
individuals are
right now.
entitled to equal rights, justice, and opportunities, and should assume their responsibilities as citizens in a free society. Fiscal responsibility and budgetary restraints must be exercised at all levels of government. That the federal government must preserve individual liberty by observing constitutional limitations. That peace is best preserved through a strong national defense. That faith in God, as recognized by our founding fathers, is essential to the moral fiber of our nation.
Thank you, sir. You're here. Okay, everybody should have a copy of the treasurer's reports and the minutes from the previous meeting. And let's see. As I sent out in the email yesterday, Sharon Bohan has seen that she can no longer serve as our secretary. Her term was supposed to run through March of 2026. If there's anybody who is interested in assuming those duties for the unexpired term, please let me know. Or if you know of anybody, please let me know. We treasurer's report and the minutes at once. Okay.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. If all in favor of accepting the reports as written, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's taken care of. All right, our speaker for tonight is Chris Wiles, who is Danville's police chief. And when I went to look him up online, there was a lot of articles about him, but didn't really go into his background. And since Neil has actually known him since he was a kid practically, I'll let Neil Morris introduce him.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to introduce and present Colonel Chris Wiles, Chief of Police of the City of Danville, to you tonight. I've known him for a long time, known all of his family, and they're all very, very exceptional to the people. Chief Wiles is a fifth-generation Danville native who began his law enforcement career with the Danville Police Department in 1993. His first assignment was a foot patrol on North Main Hill as part of the department's newly created Community Policing Unit. This was followed by assignments in patrol, criminal investigations, patrol supervision, Community Policing Unit supervisor, major of services, major of operations, division, and deputy chief of police. He served 10 years with the Virginia Army National Guard as a field artillery fire support specialist. In 1997, he was deployed to Bosnia, Herzegovina, as a part of the NATO-led multinational peacekeeping force following the Bosnian War. Chief Wiles is a Department of Criminal Justice Services certified general instructor at Piedmont Regional Criminal Justice Training Academy and a 2000 graduate of the Virginia Association Chiefs of Police Professional Executive Leadership School at the University of Richmond. He is a graduate of the 272nd, I want you to remember that number, 272nd session of the FBI National Academy and is a certified law enforcement executive through the Virginia Association Chiefs of Police. Outside of the Danville Police Department, he's an adjunct instructor in the Administration of Justice program at Danville Community College. He holds a BA from Virginia Tech and an MS from Longwood University. As you can see, he is eminently qualified to be police chief of Danville, Virginia, and anywhere else. However, we don't want you going anywhere else. We proved that. I waited 22 years now to announce a police officer from Danville, Virginia, who's a native, who rose through the ranks, and here he is. Now, I told you, remember that 272nd session of the FBI National Academy? I went through the 77th session. You know how old that makes me. Without further ado, Chief Rod.
Good evening, y'all. Appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak with y'all today about the Danville Police Department, some of the things that I hope to do with the police department, with having the incredible opportunity, really the highlight of, how could it not be the highlight of my career, to serve as the police chief to my hometown police organization. In my hometown, like 5th generation, so this is my community. Certainly Chief Morris, it's fascinating when you believe that 22-year-old Chris Wiles right out of college. Chief gave me the chance to, and the honor to serve, to protect this community, and really come to love that career. Have been very fortunate in my career to be at the right place in the right time, and have tremendous leaders and role models who have helped me along the way. And again, I would say one of the things I was talking to Chief about and coming here and speaking with you today is some of the goals and what I see for what I hope to accomplish as just chief of our organization. And I would say one of my main goals, if not my primary goal, is to make sure that the next police chief comes from our organization, like making sure that we train, that we equip, that we mentor and provide opportunity for the next leadership core of this department, so that way we can keep that internal. The time comes, sometimes you have to have external change if the need be, but I'm a firm believer that when you're doing your organization, your community doing things right, you have good people in the organization, a good leadership team, there's no reason in the world why you can't continue and have leadership from within, because those are the individuals that know and are intimately familiar with the community. So appreciate that opportunity. I'm certainly going to talk about some of the things that are going to be my focus as chief. Certainly the first two things, that if you ask any police officer with the city of Danville, what are the two major initiatives or two major focuses of the Danville Police Department, and guess what number one is, right? Reducing crime, right? And certainly as much as we can preventing crime. That can be difficult, but there is some ability with the police department when you're proactive, when you have accountability, to identify problems before they occur, and certainly if a problem does start to occur, to very quickly identify it and tend to apply a solution to it and prevent it from continuing. We found that to be the most effective model. So that's the first thing is, and we'll talk a little bit about how we go about doing that. Reducing crime, particularly violent crime. That violent crime has certainly the most corrosive effect on our community. Any violent crime obviously not just affects the individuals who are the victims of it, but oftentimes, particularly the most serious violent crimes like homicides and aggravated assaults, the family members, the loved ones, the offenders of that ultimately have to endure that impact as well. The second thing that we do, there's a primary focus of us, is accomplishing that crime fighting and crime reduction in partnership with our community. You go back to that, my very first job when I got out of the police academy, Chief had started back the old school type of policing, right, where you're actually out there on the street, interacting with the community and having that, building a relationship with individuals that are in that community. Technology changes things. Oftentimes it's for the good. I think we all agree sometimes technology can kind of separate us, and sometimes there's some negatives associated with it. Look at social media. It'd be interesting to see when we're some time out from this, we look back on social media and see whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and probably it'll be a little bit of both. But certainly the innovation, development of police cars and radios. It increases efficiency to get police officers in cars. They can more quickly respond. But one of the unfortunate side effects of that kind of technology is there was some level of disconnect from the community. And so that was launching that community policing effort and actually being out there on foot, walking the beat. And that was, again, my very first experience as a police officer. So really saw the importance of that, learning those names, learning problems, trying to problem solve things in the community, back in really a way that it was done early on. If you look at traditional policing, modern policing, if you will, Sir Robert Peel and the London Metropolitan Police Force. If you ever get the opportunity to look at Google Sir Robert Peel, Peel's principles, I think there's 9 Peelian principles. They call them Robert Peel's principles of policing, and they are just as contemporary today as they were in the 1800s when they were set up. And one of those is the police are the people, and the people are the police. And so creating that community aspect. And it's important. And I'll be honest with you, that certainly into the teens, like 2014 in particular, it's been some challenging times. And even before that, really was in California. I think we can all remember some pretty terrible times where law enforcement was involved in some pretty high-profile uses of force that really had an overarching negative impact on law enforcement. And that will occur, and there'll be a pendulum that swings, and then I think you'll see that pendulum swing back the other way. You'll see law enforcement progress, learn from those things, and that's what I think we can always do anytime something happens, whether it's certainly when it's something that's bad, it's critical, that we learn from that experience and that we grow from it and get better from it. And unfortunately with Michael Brown and Ferguson, 2014, those were, I can remember that. Then on the heels, not too far after that, COVID in 2020 with George Floyd in Minneapolis. Those were pretty bleak times for law enforcement. And really to see law enforcement change and address that and kind of come out on the other side of it strong. Because I tell you, that was a period of time that I even personally felt, and I thought I never would say this, is because my son, he's coming up, he's 23, he ended up choosing a career not in law enforcement, but it was the first time in my life that I had that feeling that, I don't know if I would encourage my son to go into a career in law enforcement because of all that negative interaction. And I know he was impacted by that, but I can tell you that in retrospect and how we've come out from that, I feel opposite from that. Now I still feel that it's a noble profession and that it's a contemporary, responsive profession that is sensitive, that has the capability of changing and doing things right. And again, community policing is an important aspect of that. We create opportunities to have engagement with our community outside of traditional policing roles. I mean, that's something that happens during the course of our regular patrol functions. Generally, people don't call the police when something's going right. Something's happened, they've been a victim of a crime, they've had some issue, and so oftentimes the police, law enforcement, citizen contact is in the context of that. And so what we do is look for opportunities to build relationships. Outside of that, we have a specialty unit, community policing unit, that looks for opportunities to kind of build those relationships. And again, I was kind of skeptical of that. I was like, I don't think the community's particularly interested in that. I think they just want us to do our policing role, and they're not particularly interested in that. And I can tell you that was something that I could have been more wrong about. I've seen the impact that having that community engagement and being active and involved in our community has had, not just on the community, but the way that it impacts the way that our officers interact on the opposite side with the community. And so those are two things that I'm certainly going to continue to do. Chief Booth, he came from Richmond Police Department, where that was a strong element within the Richmond Police Department, and certainly knew that we needed to make some changes operationally from an accountability standpoint and how we focus on crime. And so we brought that in, accountability model, which really formalized, and really got everybody on the same sheet. We've always been a good department, been a great department. We've always been, had good leadership, we've had community focus, we've had professionalism, but it's been, particularly operationally, it's been a little bit disjointed. People were kind of doing their own things. And so what we really did is that accountability model refocused the entire police department on those matters that are the most important, right? And so instead of a specialty unit being responsible for, say in the case of a crime against a person, say a homicide, instead of that being just one particular our homicide unit within our criminal investigation section, instead of that being their responsibility, when something like that happens of that high profile, it's the entire police department's responsibility to bring about resolution to that case. And so having that focus, we've really seen incredible results from that. If you've heard some of I think I had an opportunity back a couple of weeks ago to provide some of the insight into 2024 crime. A quick review on that. Our property crime continues from 2024 to hit record low levels, historic low levels of property crimes. We held the line on our aggravated assaults per year. Prior to that, we had about 36% increase in our aggravated assaults. Those are the most serious time assaults that generally involve a weapon, and or serious injury or attempt at serious injury. Somebody actually shoots at you and misses, but they shot at you. It's still an aggravated assault. It's an attempt. And we had an increase in those 36% in 2022 over 2023. So this year we were actually a few short. So we kind of held the line on that, which I think is a good accomplishment. In those aggravated assaults, we did experience a reduction in our gun-related aggravated assaults. Certainly, of the crimes, remember we focus on crimes against persons, which is that violent crimes, what we primarily focus on. It really drives a lot of our other missions as well. So we have a process of identifying individuals that are responsible for the violent crime in our community. Obviously, we all know that if anything in life, there's generally a very small percentage of whatever you're dealing with that's causing the majority of your problems. Like manufacturing, right? You know, that's a truism of manufacturing. You have machines that are having problems. It's a small percentage of those that are causing the problems versus the majority. And the same thing with our communities, even our neighborhoods that experience higher rates of crime than others. Vast majority of the people that live in those communities are law-abiding. They want the police there. They want partnership with their police department, but it's a small cohort of individuals that are responsible for most of the crime. So by being strategic, identifying those individuals, identifying those places, because again, typically it'll be place-specific, time-specific, and we focus our efforts towards those. So when it comes to, say, for example, how we handle drug and narcotic trafficking, which is an issue, when we prioritize that, because we just talked about it before, is that oftentimes there's a correlation between those things where they accompany each other. So, in and of itself, narcotics trafficking, drug dealing, that's one thing, but what we find is there's often violent crime and gun violence that's associated with that, right? And so what we do is when we prioritize our resources and our focus, we focus on those that are visiting violence. Certainly that's the highest priority, to identify those that are visiting violence in our community. Again, I've found that to be a pretty successful model in doing that. Again, from one of the things that we did that has been pretty substantial in the way we changed, it was and Chief, I don't even know how long, certainly our patrol was deployed that way when I came on, so it had been, and it's as far as a platoon-based system, where at any given point in time, the patrol officers that were working, the patrol officers are the men and women you see in our patrol cars driving up and down the street, marked cars, in uniform, responding to radio calls, 911 calls, initiating traffic stops by and large, having those direct interactions. They rotated as an entire unit. So you had a supervisor in that platoon. It was a platoon-based system. So during a shift period of time, in this case, if it was 12-hour shifts, for a 12-hour period of time, the supervisors and officers that worked, they worked as a cohort. And then when they got off, that entire shift got off, another shift came in, and it rotated 4 on, 4 off, and so on those 4 days off, what you had was there was a level of, with a city our size, you were starting to see there was a little bit of a disconnect in supervisor accountability, right? Because what happens is when you're own and your shift is owned and you're a patrol supervisor, you're just really trying to keep up with the day-to-day and managing what's going on at this point in this time, getting through the day, right? Riding it to the buzzer, right? If you want to use it, or the bill, if you use a bull riding analogy. But what that does is it doesn't create that supervisory contact and continuity to issues in the city. Like they're just, imagine that at any point in time, if we're having a particular issue at different points in the city, imagine you're having to have 4 sets of supervisors when they rotate on and off, keep up with what's going there and coordinate those efforts. It's very difficult to do. And so what we did is we divided the city into quarters, and we assigned those supervisors and officers to those geographic quarters and gave them direct responsibility and accountability for handling those issues that occur in those communities. And they're different, right? And so, for example, the northwest section that we're in here, so what can you say about, say, if you Piney Forest Road going towards Riverside, Piedmont, Mount Cross, how's that different from, say, the southwest or southeast corridor, which is primarily residential? This is primarily commercial, right? So the issues and the challenges that each particular area of the city has are different. And so having supervisors to be accountable and responsible for coordinating those efforts, we have found to be very successful. And so that's something that's been a change that we're continuing to build on. And it's challenging because at any point in time, you have officers working for different sets of supervisors. But what we found is, because officers have always been typically assigned to work a geographic area beat, right? We call them beats. But this model really ties those supervisors as well to that too. And we found that to be a successful model. So something we're going to continue to build and refine. Some other initiatives personally that I look to the department have started to work towards. Again, a lot of these operational changes that we've made are working. Continue to obviously refine on those, how we engage our community, look for opportunities to create conversations with our community. Again, it's something we will continue to build on. So we're doing all those things very well. One of the things I think we reached a point too was just to start looking internally and focus on how we can improve our internal processes. And one of the things I've come to understand and follow modern organizational leadership, and any organization that's talking about organizational change as a common term that's come up that I've kind of come to understand to be at a later point in my career to be critically important, and that's culture, the culture of an organization. And when you see these things happen across communities, in police departments that go viral in those events, you wonder, how does that happen in a community or in a police department when it seems to happen all? How does that continue to happen? And I'm more convinced now more than ever that it's agency culture. It's the leadership culture. It's what that agency defines itself by, what behaviors it accepts as being the right behaviors or the core behaviors, or those behaviors that we expect and that define our organization. Several well-written books out there, Culture by Design is one of them, that really talks about codifying or being intentional about your organizational culture. If you go out there and you think about it's an interesting, if you look at like Boeing and how Boeing's culture was prior to its merger with McDonnell Douglas, and you've seen some of the things that have happened like with Boeing and safety, and you wonder, how does that happen? And that happens because there's a cultural shift in the organization, one from engineering excellence and safety to profit, right, and at the expense of that. So that's just one example from a corporate level of how agency culture is important. So what we did first of the year, brought in a team that helped us sit down and define and identify what we believe are our core behaviors of our organization, not just integrity or professionalism, but actually detailed behaviors, specific behaviors that define our organization. We end up coming up with 29 of them. And so what we do is indoctrinating that, making that part of our everyday conversation. So when we recognize officers, when we speak every week, we have one of those core, we call them fundamentals, core fundamental behaviors. We highlight those, and again, making sure that we, now that we're doing things right, let's take this opportunity to set our culture and to indoctrinate that and make sure that that's something that continues going forward. It's a common language that we all speak when we deal with each other. In that, again, designing and being intentional about our organizational culture is making sure that we are preparing our officers for not just being safe on the street. I know I appreciate all the comments and thoughts, a lot of reach out from the community. We just recently had, last Monday, a police officer that was shot in the line of duty, was ambushed is really the only way to explain what happened to her, and miraculously and through, not just miraculously, but through, I believe, her training, she was able to, despite having been shot multiple times, was able to stay in the fight, to fight through that. She actually had a malfunction of a weapon. She was able to correct that malfunction and to stay in the fight and ultimately prevail in that. And we were talking about it near the end of the week. We were doing a review on it. So, if there's any question about the criticality and importance of training, that demonstrated it, right? And even in talking to her, she didn't remember it, right? Those kinds of automatic behaviors that occur in high stress circumstances, you're going to revert to your training. So that's something that we have focused on, that we continue to focus on to make sure that we provide our officers with the highest quality training. Certainly use of force is obviously one of the most sensitive and significant issues that law enforcement agencies may face if they have a use of force in their community. And so why would we not focus a good part of our training, even though it's rare that it occurs, but ultimately when it does occur, it can have terrible consequences one way or the other. And so just reiterate to me the importance of our training and the continuation of our training, particularly when it comes to use of force. In that vein too, how we deal with and handle some of the more complex issues that aren't really traditionally police issues, but because of the nature of society end up falling on the police to address people in mental health crisis, right? I mean, we certainly receive, basic, when I first came in, some basic familiarization about mental health and what it looks like when somebody's in a mental health crisis. But certainly now, that it's even become a more significant issue, and all of the entire police department goes through crisis intervention training, learning a little bit more detail. We're not mental health clinicians, nor should we be, right? But there is no doubt that oftentimes police are the first on scene when it comes, the call comes in that somebody's in mental health crisis. So why would we not provide our officers with some basic fundamental training on how to deal with those situations, to de-escalate those situations, to understand and know how those situations operate, so that we can then have opportunity, professionals, clinicians, who actually have the expertise to deal with those. That's one of them. Substance abuse, I'm sure you're all familiar. It's the scourge of opioids, particularly here recently, with the increase in fentanyl, and that's something that's interesting. Danville had kind of been, our drug market has always been a little bit different from most, where areas to our north and west had been experiencing issues with, more long-term issues with opioid overdoses, particularly heroin. Some areas around us were really experiencing that and have been experiencing it for some time. Danville, it really was, we were kind of cocaine and marijuana were really our, and every now and again you would come across heroin, but generally it would be coming from outside or somebody coming through. It wasn't as pervasive. Of course, that's changed with fentanyl, and when we really saw an increase in the number of overdose, not just overdoses, but overdose deaths as well. It's significant over the years, and so training in that, equipping our officers with Narcan that allows us an opioid antagonist, that they're able to provide that in the field. It's countless the number of times that we deploy that in the field and save a life from that. And then we're in partnership with Danville Pennsylvania Community Services. You have to make sure the crisis center. So when we do experience somebody that does have an opioid overdose, oftentimes right there on the heels of a particularly if they survive, that's kind of maybe what you say, come to Jesus moment, right? You almost lost your life. We find that's a good opportunity to try to really get them plugged into services, and it doesn't always work. I mean, it's drug addiction, substance abuse disorder is significant, and the resources aren't always there to support it, particularly from the family resources. But the community resources, we're building that out and providing that service. Again, trying to reduce the harm that substance has. And again, how we focus our towards the crime side, that's one of the, from a drug narcotic violations, besides our violent crime, that's another thing that we focus on. So when we do have an overdose, we look at that, we're really trying to identify what the source of that overdose is, because generally what happens is they come in waves, and what we have is we have a shipment of drugs, or somebody's distributing a particular distributor that has a more higher concentrated, more dangerous level of drugs off of fentanyl. So what we do is we use that opportunity to, not just to provide that person services, but to go after the distributor of that led to that overdose. And that again has been a successful model for us. Obviously those individuals that are distributing those most dangerous drugs, obviously are those that we want to focus our attention on. So training, very important. Yes, ma'am.
Since President Trump took office, the southern border is almost shut down 100%. Are you seeing a change in how much fentanyl is coming through?
We had, what I would say is really over the last year or so, we've seen a reduction in that. I think it was back in the late fall, and Governor Youngkin held a press conference. Virginia was really concentrated on, they call it the Bold Blue Line Initiative, and it's really concentrated on certainly violent crime, but also on opioids. And so there's been several statewide initiatives that are focusing on fentanyl in particular, and you've seen some pretty significant reductions in those. And so I would say probably with taking all that together, I think that's why you've seen some reductions in that from the focus that the harm that substance causes. I'm sure you've all seen it's just a tiny small amount of that substance can precipitate an overdose. So it's the drugs that are now available. We were just talking earlier before the meeting about the pervasiveness of marijuana, right? And we're in an unusual situation in Virginia where it's legal to possess in small quantities, but there's not a organized retail process for it other than medicinal marijuana. So it creates this unusual dichotomy for law enforcement, right? And so, but it's everywhere. I don't think you probably go anywhere and not smell it. It's kind of everywhere. But again, even with that, without regulation, you don't know what you're actually getting, what it's potentially laced with. So the danger is still out there. And certainly from marijuana, we know that the THC contents of current marijuana is substantially higher than marijuana from back in the 60s, 70s, or certainly even up in the 80s and 90s. You're having 30-40% THC, where before it was single digits. So that has certainly changed too. So training, focusing on partnerships with our community, whether it's Danville Pennsylvania Community Services. In fact, we're getting ready to initiate what's a Marcus Alert program. If anybody familiar heard of that, Marcus Alert. It's actually not exactly what the acronym is, but it stemmed from an incident. Marcus Peters, he was in a mental health crisis, ended up involved in that into an incident with a police officer up in Richmond, and he ended up lining up with him being shot and killed. And so, again, I think when terrible things happen, what we do is we learn from those and we find better ways of doing things. One of the things that Marcus Alert is going to bring us out is having co-response. So instead of having to deal with those things or maybe transport somebody from a field environment into a clinical environment, we're actually going to have clinicians that are going to be on duty and in the field that can co-respond with law enforcement so that, you know, those professionals that have those particular skills can apply those immediately and serve as to support those that are in mental health crisis. So again, I think we're in a really good way. The state's moving towards a lot of these things, whether it's opioids, mental health crisis, creating more resources for those. I think we're moving in a positive direction on those. Leadership training in all levels, I talked about briefly. I think it's critically important that we continue to develop, even at the very very entry level point when officers come into the organization, to start leadership level at all training, right? So it's not just you get leadership level when you get that first promotion or you go up through the ranks. You know, really leadership takes place throughout the entire organization, right? So, even as a police officer, there's, and I'm sure you know it too in your workplaces or in social acts, there's always people that are your informal leaders in your organization. So go ahead and equip them with the tools, you know, bring them into your organization and grow that, because I think that's what ultimately produces continuity within your organization. Again, establishes that culture of professionalism, of codifying the behaviors that we want, of solving crime, and in doing so while in partnership with our community. Those are two things that I think can happen together. The other thing that's of personal interest to me, and again, this is more of an internal focus, is officer wellness. You know, we've talked about that incident that occurred with the officer that was involved in that shooting incident. Thank goodness, despite being shot multiple times, she was extraordinarily fortunate and is not going to sustain any kind of long-term. In fact, she was released the next day. That's how fortunate she was. No serious injuries. But rest assured, the physical injuries are sometimes can be eclipsed by the emotional impact and experience and something like that. And so, you know, law enforcement, you know, we see some pretty terrible things, Chief. You know, you see oftentimes some of the worst in humanity. And it can be not just can make you cynical sometimes. I know she's seen some pretty terrible things. And over the course of time, that can really weigh on you. And I think we've historically haven't done a good job as supporting the men and women that are exposed to that. And understanding that and we're in a position where we know now kind of the long-term impacts of being exposed to that kind of trauma. You know, unfortunately, a lot of things that we learn, whether it's from medicine or mental health and the consequences that we learn from our men and women in uniform that go and fight wars and are exposed to horrific injuries, right, and significant trauma. And again, if there's anything that we benefit from their sacrifice besides their protecting our country and way of life, what they experience, ultimately we learn from it. It makes us internally better. It makes us be able to provide better medical treatment. Every one of our police vehicles now has a kit that has life-saving elements in it that would come straight out of the battlefield. Clotting materials, occlusive dressings, tourniquets, things that we learned with our men and women that sacrificed on our battlefields across the world. Likewise, we've seen how our veterans oftentimes have to deal with the trauma impact of being exposed to that kind of violence and that kind of emotional stress. And so again, one of the things that we're working at, developing and normalizing that, right? Police officer, or they're kind of tough skinned, right? But I think creating an environment where you normalize that, hey, this is something that you're going to deal with. You know, providing the opportunities for officers to have wellness check-ins, to not just make sure that they're physically doing well, but they are doing well emotionally, and they have that support, and they have the resources to help them deal with that, because it can be difficult. That's one of the higher, and unfortunately, over the course of time, Chief, I know we've had suicides of Danville officers, and it's terrible enough to lose an officer in the line of duty, but to lose one to suicide is equally impactful for the organization, and it's the stress of that can be difficult to handle. But yeah, so those are some of the things that I intend to with my team. And I'll be the first to tell you. I don't know if I would have thrown my hat in the ring to be the chief of this organization, were it not for the incredible team of men and women that I have and that we have and that our community has working for us. Day in and day out, I'm thankful for that. Again, we're right in the middle of a promotion process. We had one of our captains retire, and what's good about that is that creates a trickle-down effect throughout our organization. We're going to promote a captain, and then a lieutenant, a sergeant, a corporal, so that gives an opportunity again for leadership to come up through the entire organization, and really look forward to that opportunity. But we were just going through the process, and it's pretty extraordinary when we look at the cohort of men and women that are competing to be our next leaders in this organization. So very encouraged about that. In fact, when we had the folks that would come in to do one of our, we had part of that is a energy panel is one of the elements in there. Some folks from the community and also from other law enforcement agencies, and went in and spoke to each group and said, and I sincerely believe this is, thank them, because what they're doing is helping us take what was probably one of the most important decisions that we make is who we put into leadership roles in our organizations, right? Because it's a quote, John Maxwell quote, everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think we can see that in so many different places throughout our world, and it certainly is very true in the police department, to make sure we foster leadership and that we recognize it and we develop it from within. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to say how much I appreciate the Danville Police Department. I was attacked in the park back in the 90s, and I kind of talked the guy out of leaving me alone. But, he ended up getting, I don't know, I think it was 6 or 8 years or something for attempted forcible sodomy because he threatened.
Threatened to.
Yeah. And, but, the word got back to me that the men on the police department were pulling for me, and I appreciated that.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that.
So that's a neat thing. Got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned George Floyd. I think that incident kind of reversed racial progress in a lot of ways across the country. And I believe that was it Milwaukee where that happened?
It was Minneapolis.
Minneapolis. I got my M's mixed up. Anyway, I write a little paper, and so I did an article on that, and what I noticed was George Floyd had been in prison for whatever he had done, but he went into a drugstore and he tried to pass a $20 counterfeit bill. Well, he comes back out of the drugstore, and what does he do? But he gets into a navy blue Mercedes with beautiful leather seats in it, and there's somebody in the back seat that I never heard mentioned by any of the news people, and I just felt like the whole thing was not really real. It was something wrong with this thing, and I felt like they might have been, somebody might have been overrunning that Minneapolis department, because I just didn't think they were handling it right.
Yeah, I think it's hard not to look at that and identify that those officers went beyond what, we've been doing this long enough to know there's an acceptable amount of force that's being able to be, that you can use. Certainly that's a circumstance that clearly went over. And I think what I think you have to be open-minded about is kind of the aftermath of that, where you had, I believe, officers made some fundamentally and critically bad decisions that ultimately cost that man his life. More significantly, too, you had other officers that stood by while it happened. I think that's without question. But I think the unintended consequence of that is despite the identification and accountability that needs to happen within that organization. Again, I believe that happens because of bad agency culture, that somebody doesn't anybody can have, can make a mistake, anybody can let their emotions get the best of them. but there should be a culture of intervention when that happens. I mean, as a young officer, I had those circumstances. We always talk about, hey, if somebody's assaults you and tries to hurt you, it's hard to disassociate your emotions from that. So that's why you have to rely on each other to help intervene in those circumstances, and that clearly didn't happen in that case. But I think the fallout of that, unfortunately, is that you had this anti-police movement that certain groups used.
It's terrible, and they go back to George Floyd so many times, and with these investigations, and I mean, we're Republicans in here, we like the fact that the country's being checked on. But, I think you gotta be on your toes, boy, if there's somebody pulling strings against you.
Well, and yeah, I think there you had folks that were using that terrible circumstance to forward an overarching political agenda. For example, defund the police, right?
Yeah.
And I know, as I've read it enough and I've heard it enough, is that the communities that are most impacted by violent crime, they don't want to defund the police. They want the police.
Right,
They want
the country's behind
partnership. They
you.
want professional, respectful policing and partnership with their communities. They want that, right? And so, it's unfortunate when something bad happens like that, people take that as an opportunity to hijack and further a political motive that ultimately, in the case of, I would say, the defund the police and some of the movements that came after that had a really negative impact on law enforcement and a pullback of law enforcement from communities. And that's, maybe some talking heads were saying that, but I really do sincerely believe, because I've heard it firsthand, that the communities that are most impacted by violent crime, they want the police. They want a partnership with the police, right?
Y'all have been through a lot, all of these departments across the country, they got kicked in the teeth by this.
It was tough. Like I said, that was probably one of the most dark periods in the policing that I experienced. But hey, we're resilient. We move through and learn from that, move through that, and I think we come out of it, when you take that perspective, you come out of it better. You learn from your mistakes, and you put that behind you, and look for opportunities to improve and not get caught up in those that may want to use something terrible for their specific agenda, like whatever that may be. Because ultimately we want to work in partnership with our community. We're not out there when most crimes occur. I mean, we really aren't. From time to time we'll come upon them, right? But crimes generally, if a police officer's there, the criminal's generally going to find some other place or move on to the next target. So if we don't have a partnership with our community and cooperation, you can't effectively police the community.
Yeah, I had a picture of that car, and I tried to run the tag, but I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And so somebody owned that Mercedes, and I don't think it was George Floyd who got in there and drove away.
All of that was a terrible incident, and was extremely destructive to our policing and our communities. But we have, I think, again, we're a very resilient nation. We're very resilient people. We're going to learn from it and come out better on the other side from those mistakes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
From what I've heard here tonight, it sounds like we've got the right guy in the job. Somebody who, Danville native, who has worked his way up from the bottom to the top job. And we thank you for
I appreciate it. Thank
coming
you for the
tonight. And any other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question, has your department been contacted by Tom Holman?
I'm not, who's that?
He's the
Tom
border
Holman,
czar.
Operations
Tom
Officer.
Holman.
Oh, no, ma'am.
No.
That obviously is in Virginia, and certainly those states that are along the border, experience immigration crisis much more significant in larger cities. For Danville, that really hasn't been an issue for us. Certainly hasn't been a crime issue for us, and it hasn't driven us. So I think that sounds like to me that those focus has been on those areas where it has the most impact in those for Danville. That it really hasn't been a source of our crime or our issues.
Plus New York and Boston.
What's that?
I said plus New York and Boston.
Oh, yeah, there's certainly others, areas, communities that are much more directly impacted by those kinds of things. Danville, we're fortunate enough. We certainly have our challenges, make no mistake about it. We still have an element of folks that use violence to solve personal disputes over the most, that hadn't changed. If you go and look at most of these violent crimes, they're committed by people who have either know each other personally by name or have some casual associate, at least a casual association with each other. So very rarely is unlike your experience, is violent crime anonymous. It's not strangers, it's people who know each other. And so taking that opportunity, particularly when it's associated with other criminal activity, gang activity, when we have an incident, that's one of the first things, obviously, besides trying to solve who did it, who committed that violent crime of violence, we look at their network and their associations, because we want to determine whether or not there's potential for retaliatory violence. And that's in 2016 when we had 17 homicides, which is extraordinary. That was a good portion of those had to do with like retaliatory type violence. And so really we go after not just those individuals who may specifically commit the crime, we also focus our attention on, hey, where might there be additional crime or retaliatory actions, and we immediately focus on that too to prevent additional follow-on crime. Yes, sir.
Chief, so is there anything else the council could do to keep the good progress going on?
Sir, I tell you, I've said this, and I think I echo a common sentiment. We have it's something special we have in our community here. Despite differences, I think our community is focused on enhancing and improving this community. Our local, I think, politicians, our elected officials, our leaders are really focused on positively impacting this community and working together. And so, council has been extraordinarily supportive of the police department. When you look just around you, regionally, you see some divisiveness, and unfortunately, I think that sometimes can take away from the work that takes place on that local line level. And we are so very fortunate to have a city council and city leadership that I think is really focused on improving this community.
So I'm a Super V Cadillac, and plus I do have a mental breakdown if I'm getting pulled. I do know that.
Yes, sir.
That if it's the night vision on my thing is fantastic, because I patrol on my lots, just ride through it, and I can tell if a van's been there for 20, 30 minutes because it's heated up.
Yeah.
I can see them 10 feet down in the woods and the deer too. And I just didn't know if y'all had some sort of that technology that y'all are good with, or.
Yeah, we have handheld device, and we'll, from time to time, if we have the circumstance, like a missing person, or we have a circumstance like that, we have access to that. The fire department has access, or has those, all the fire stations. And so regularly we'll reach out to them. In fact, just recently, we had a guy who was wanted for several crimes, serious crimes. Had information he was at a house off of Bradley Road, actually it was an apartment. To get there, the resident, she lets us search we had enough for a search warrant. She lets us search on consent. We couldn't find him. We find an area where we believe he's gotten up into this attic, right? And so we had to go. We actually got a search warrant because he went and he was in the common area in the attic. But ultimately, that's how we found him. Is we got the FLIR device. FLIR was a brand of infrared. Was able to locate him up in the ceiling using technology. So, hey, technology makes us better, makes us safer. Sometimes it has some unintended consequences, but.
So the most impactful thing that I've been to is when you have the dedication to the fallen police officers.
Yes, sir.
That's been the biggest thing that's impacted the council, and I hope other council members go to it, because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yes, sir. It is, and every May, Peace Officer Memorial Week goes in May, that's coming up, and so we certainly recognize the sacrifice that across the nation, but more especially how it impacts our community. And one of the things we've done, we started back several years ago, and you're talking about the impact and seeing how, when you hear about it, know, it's terrible and your thoughts are with it, but when you know the individuals or you contact the family members, and you see the impact that has, it's profound. And we're fortunate enough to live close to the nation's capital, that on a national level, that recognition takes place in May. We're close enough where we send a delegation of our honor guard up to DC.
Also. Yes, sir.
They actually, when the families come in, of officers that lost their life that coming year, that their names are being put on the memorial, they meet the families at the terminals, actually at the gates, and escort them from the gate of the airport, give them an extraordinarily police escort. Yeah, you couldn't. I mean, it's dozens of motorcycles.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very impactful.
Anything else?
Hey, my number's always there if you ever need anything, any questions, any concerns, let me know. That's what we're here for.
Thanks so much.
Thank y'all so much. Yes, sir. Thank you.
On the hour. All right. Good, Danny? Okay. Go ahead, Danny.
Still there?
Is he unmuted?
Maybe watching YouTube, maybe he's 10 seconds behind.
Send him a text. Anyway, Diane's got, petitions for Madison. I'm not jumping the gun here because it's already been announced. But, as everybody I'm sure knows, Danny Marshall has, decided not to run again in November. He's been there since, 2001, something like that. Anyway, Madison has thrown his cowboy hat in the ring, and he is going to run for that seat. And there are petitions to get him on the ballot. We need, 150?
Yes, sir.
We need 150 signatures. So everybody here tonight, please sign. There's probably a county and a city one. Yeah, make sure you sign the right one. Fill it out completely so that there's no question about anything. And we get this man on the ballot and get him elected in November. Danny has called in and he said he wanted to speak to the group, and we're trying to get him called up here. In the meantime, Madison, would you like to say a few words?
I'm just gonna simply work the same, as hard as Danny does, and I'm a great advocate for Southside, and that, we'll continue. Thank you.
Anyway. All right, let me try.
Did he take you back? I said, well, Texas still on the line, and he's unmuted.
I told him he's on the line, but he can't get in.
Technology, right? It works as great, but it doesn't.
Hey, tell him to hang up and call back. He's not here.
Well, there he is.
Huh?
Right there.
No, I meant very
Oh, I know she's pushing, she said she's staying.
Another lady, she was hung up, but she had to go, and she said she carried everything good. So I'm not sure whether.
We'll give him a chance, we'll give him another minute or so, otherwise we'll just call it an evening, I guess.
Yes, ma'am.
when you get older, you fall asleep.
He hasn't responded back, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't get anything from a text either.
All right, well, our next meeting is scheduled for March 25th. Tuesday, March 25th. All in favor of adjournment, say aye. Good night, everybody.